just read Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, or Schlachthof-Fünf, or Slaughterhouse-Five. This one reminded me a lot of Joseph Heller's Catch-22, which I read recently. And there's obvious connections between the two of them. They're both published in the late 1960s. They're both written by veterans from the Second World War, both American veterans. And they're both very sort of funny or satirical takes, and they're both anti-war. I mean, Catch-22 is a lot more satirical than Slaughterhouse-Five, but Slaughterhouse-Five is still sort of funny and weird enough that I see sort of a connection between the two. So this is the second Vonnegut novel I've read. I read Cat's Cradle a while ago. Didn't really like it. Couldn't really understand it. This one though, I did like. I thought this one was much better. And I think it's because it has this sort of weird blend of fiction and non-fiction. Like, parts of it are true, except the parts that aren't. So Vonnegut himself was a veteran in the Second World War. He was captured as a prisoner of war and held in Dresden during the firebombings of Dresden at the end of the war. And that's what this book is about, sort of a book about the firebombing of Dresden, which it does say in the introduction that he sort of has over-exaggerated, unintentionally, the death toll in the firebombing. He compares it to the atomic bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima and the firebombing of Tokyo, and sort of says that firebombing of Dresden sort of was greater than those. Well, it wasn't, but it was still comparable. It's still absolutely horrible and destructive. It resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of people, but it wasn't as bad. I mean, to say that, it's kind of ridiculous to compare things like that, because I mean, one death is a tragedy, so doesn't matter if it's 50,000 or 200,000. Anyway, so this story sort of tells his story, but it's weird. It starts out, so get this. The first chapter is sort of a prologue, but it's not a prologue, it's the first chapter, where Vonnegut, or maybe a fictionalized version of him, and this is where it gets confusing, because Vonnegut himself is in this story, but what parts of it are true and what parts of it are real, and is it all real but it's not quite all true, and what's fiction and what's non-fiction? It's very strange. But the narrator, presumably Kurt Vonnegut, is telling in the first chapter that he's been talking about writing this book about the bombing of Dresden, and he goes to visit an old war buddy and they want to talk about it, and he's trying to get ideas and thinking about things like what happened during that time when we were prisoners of war in Dresden, and what can this other veteran remember, and then we can sort of piece together a narrative to write this book that he's going to write. And one thing, the wife of this guy, which I don't know if this guy's a real guy or not, if Vonnegut actually went and spoke to this guy or not, no idea. But this guy's wife says, like, oh, it's horrible. Why are you writing a book about war? It's just going to cause more people to want to go off to fight in the war. And he said he'll title it The Children's Crusade. And that sort of placates this woman, because the Children's Crusade was one of the crusades back in the Middle Ages when someone managed to convince a whole bunch of children to sort of march on Jerusalem to take it back to the Christians, but then ended up marching all these kids off to a slave market and sold all the children into slavery. That's an actual thing that did happen. So in the first chapter, this narrator, Vonnegut, claims that he's going to call the book the Children's Crusade, which this book is called that. So it's called Slaughterhouse-Five, but subtitle is The Children's Crusade, or A Dance with Death. Is it Dance with Death? Or sorry, A Duty Dance with Death. Even more alliteration. And he uses the term A Children's Crusade because himself and a lot of the people he saw that fought in the First World War were to him just children. I mean, they would have been 18, 19, 20-year-olds, like children, very young. And they're being sent off to fight in this ridiculous, crazy war. Now, he was not saying that they shouldn't have fought in the Second World War. He's not a pacifist, but it is an anti-war book. So the book is written in the context of the Vietnam War currently going on, and he's not so much railing against it as sort of kind of stoically accepting it. There's the line "so it goes" that is peppered throughout this book. Almost every page has it at least once, or something horrible or dreadful or unfortunate will happen, and it will just say, "so it goes." Oh, he met his wife, and then his wife died in a horrible car accident, so it goes. Or, they had a kid, and the kid grew up, and on their graduation day, they got struck by lightning and exploded. So it goes. Like, those don't actually happen in the book. That's just crazy things happen, and it's like, so it goes. Like, I just opened to a random page, and it says here, "You have friends?" Derby wanted to know. "In the war?" said Lazaro. "Yeah, I had a friend in the war. He's dead." So it goes. Literally, again, flip to a random page. "The Germans carried the corpse out. The corpse was Wild Bob." So it goes. Wild Bob was a character that if you're ever in Cody, Wyoming, ask for Wild Bob. Well, he's dead. So it goes. But it's that sort of like, c'est la vie. It happens. I mean, obviously it's not sort of a pacifist in that, well, roll over and just accept whatever happens, but it points out the ridiculousness of all this and how tragedies happen, but they're going to happen. We can't prevent everything. Anyway, so after the first chapter, we actually get into the story, the sort of fictional story, where we follow this guy, Billy Pilgrim, who is sent off to war, and he doesn't even get into his unit or assigned into a unit, or he doesn't even get his uniform. He's still in civilian uniform, still wearing the clothing that he wore to his father's funeral, which he had just attended before he'd flown over to Europe. So it goes. And he gets captured as a prisoner of war. He gets caught behind enemy lines. I think it was the Battle of the Bulge. Although I don't know much about the Battle of the Bulge. Was that even in the Second World War? I don't know. It was around Luxembourg, I think. And he got captured, shipped off in a train to Dresden, where he worked in a slaughterhouse as sort of slave labor for the Germans. Now it's interesting, he always uses the words Germans. I don't think the word Nazi is ever mentioned at all in this book. Now maybe that is because it's a book about the firebombing of Dresden, and sort of the civilian population of Dresden. The civilian Germans are sort of the victims in this, and so he doesn't want to paint them all as Nazis. They're all Germans, they're not all Nazis. But it's not denying the atrocities of the Nazis. I mean, the Holocaust is mentioned numerous times, and in death camps, and how the soap and the candles that they use in the prison are created from the fat of these melted down Jews and the Romani and various peoples. Yeah, so it follows the story of this guy, and again, the weird part, so you're following this Billy Pilgrim, and you're thinking, okay, so this is the fictional account. But there are times throughout the narrative when there'll be another soldier or someone else mentioned, another American POW, and the narrator of the book, presumably Kurt Vonnegut, will say, like, that was me. That was me. I was that other person in this story. So Billy Pilgrim is this fictional character that is telling these true events, and the events that they're telling are so true that other people that are in this story are actual real people. It really sort of blurs the line between reality and fiction, but in a really interesting way. And so they're in this slaughterhouse, and because they're in this slaughterhouse, there's like a meat locker under the underground, and that's where they are during the firebombing, and that's how they manage to survive. And then they crawl out, and he describes it time and again as a sort of a moonscape. Everything burned, no green, no living, only rock and dust and dirt. And just a few days after that, or I don't know how long it is, but the war ends. And there's a scene talking about them going back into the city to collect souvenirs, which is kind of like looting the city, but they're just sort of collecting odds and ends to bring home. And there's this one older man, like in his 40s, who's a school teacher, Edgar Derby, I think his name is, and he's described as taking a teapot or a tea set or something from the ruins. And he gets arrested for looting, which I thought that's what everyone was doing, but for whatever reason he gets arrested, and because it's wartime, he sort of gets tried without a proper trial and sentenced to death and executed by firing squad, which that's mentioned again and again through this book, that this happens to this man. So I wonder if that's something that actually happened, that this, for whatever reason, this one man just gets singled out for a sort of a crime that everyone else is committing, a crime that really doesn't have any victims, because presumably everyone's already dead in the city, and is killed for it at the end of the war, totally unnecessarily. But the main storytelling trick of the whole book is the fact that Billy Pilgrim has come loose from time. Our main character, Billy Pilgrim, can travel forwards and backwards in time, and by that I mean that his sort of consciousness can go back in time to when he's a 10-year-old boy on vacation with his parents, and he's sort of living through those experiences. And then he jumps ahead to when he's 45 playing golf. And then he jumps back to during the war. And then he jumps ahead to his wife's funeral. So the narrative of the book is jumping all over the place in time. We're sort of getting all of Billy Pilgrim's life cut up into different bits and pieces that we're getting here and again. So the sort of story of him in the war takes place over the course of the entire book. But in between that, we're getting him jumping back and forth and getting his whole life. And so we're sort of seeing the whole life of this man who was born in the 1920s and dies in 1976, being shot by like a laser gun, because since 1976 is the future when you're writing in the 1960s. And so we meet people like Robert, Billy Pilgrim's son, who's one of the Green Berets and is fighting in Vietnam. We see his daughter, who thinks he's sort of going crazy. We see his wife that he falls in love with and marries, and she's described time and again as being kind of ugly or not that great of a person, but she's super wealthy, and so Billy becomes super wealthy after the war. But I think that sort of giving us the full view of Billy Pilgrim's life is meant to sort of put the war in perspective. Now, I'm not saying that it's meant to show that the war is kind of insignificant in the grand scheme of things. I don't think it's meant to diminish the horrors on like a societal level, but maybe for an individual, for a veteran with PTSD. I'm not saying for Vonnegut does, but there certainly were people that did. Maybe this book is sort of a way to show that, hey, like, you've got your whole life before the war and your whole life after the war, and all these things can happen, and the war is just sort of a tiny slice of that. And if that's not weird enough of him jumping sort of forward and backward in time, which I don't even know what that means. He sort of knows what's coming because he's already experienced it, because he's already jumped ahead and back, and so he knows when he's going to die. He knows that his wife's going to die, and he again takes it very stoically, like, so it goes, like, whatever is going to happen is going to happen, and it already has happened, and it already will happen, and there's nothing I can do about it. But if that's not weird enough, he gets abducted by aliens from Trafalmador. I can't remember the name. From a very strange, weird planet. These like weird, goofy aliens that look like hands with eyeballs on stalks with legs. Anyways, he gets captured by these aliens and put in sort of a dome, sort of a zoo thing where they create sort of a habitat for him like an earthling would have, and they abduct this like beautiful actress or model for him and put them in the dome together. And of course they're naked the whole time. They can't wear clothes in this zoo. It's a pretty sort of raunchy, or not raunchy, but it's, especially for the 1960s, it's very crude and lewd and rude and all those other ood words. But anyways, he stays in this zoo for a while. And at some point he leaves it. He gets this woman pregnant, and then I don't think it ever describes how he left the planet, but he goes back to Earth at some point and leaves that woman there, who there's like a newspaper article or something about this woman who's been missing, and he's like, oh yeah, I know her, she's on Trafalmador with our child. But there's also sort of this Kilgore Trout, which I meant to look up. Is Kilgore Trout an actual real person? But there's this character Kilgore Trout who writes loads of science fiction novels, just like pumps them out like there's no tomorrow. And Billy Pilgrim really likes these novels. No one else kind of reads them, but Billy Pilgrim, because this one time he was in a hospital with another guy who had all the novels, and so he's read them all. But some of the novels have plots about people being abducted by aliens and put in an alien zoo, or people that have become unstuck from time. And so it makes me think that maybe this whole sort of weird alien abduction thing is all in Billy Pilgrim's head, and it's all made up, and he's just sort of created it from reading all these science fiction novels, and that paired with sort of his PTSD from the war has sort of added this sort of sci-fi element to the book, where it's not really a sci-fi book. It's just the narrator, again Vonnegut, is describing Billy's point of view, and from his point of view he was abducted by aliens, but it's really just from the books he read and him getting unstuck in time. Is it really just a weird sense of deja vu when the event happens, that he thinks he's already remembered it, and that when he goes back in time, he's just like reliving a memory and disassociating? I don't know. You could really get into, but I like that you could potentially think that way, or you could just take it literally, where this man is unstuck from time and does get abducted by these Trafalmadorians. And these aliens, by the way, exist outside of time. They describe again and again how they sort of find humans very strange, that humans seem to think in only 3 dimensions, whereas these beings exist in 4 dimensions where they can see time. So it's described, they don't see humans as being bipedal, they see them as being giant stretched millipedes, where each moment of their time they can see all at once. So like they see this person moving, and then moving also where they hadn't moved, and the forward and backward create this giant sort of millipede people. And they mention that when they're at the zoo talking to Billy in the zoo, he says like something about, how do you guys have peace and not war? What's the secret to a peaceful society? And they're like, we have tons of wars. When we have had tons of wars, we will have tons of wars and genocide and murder and death and all of the horrible things. In fact, the very end of the universe is going to happen because we caused it. And he's like, well, can't you prevent that? And they're like, what do you mean prevent it? It is going to happen because it has already happened, because everything's happening all at the same time. Because they can sort of see all of eternity in at once, and they're not limited to one time, they experience everything. And how do they deal with that? How do they deal with knowing that the horrors that have happened and the horrors that will happen is that they focus on moments of happiness and peace and calm. And that's when they're at the zoo. They're like, this is a wonderful moment. We're having a fun day out at the zoo. And this is why we are sort of experiencing this moment, is because sure, we know there's all kinds of horrible things happening, but we just need to find a few good moments and focus on those. And that's how we sort of get through the hard times. And I guess that's sort of the philosophy of the book, is that war is absolutely horrible, but life goes on after war. There had been life before war, and just because we exist in 3 dimensions, time is weird, and things that had happened still exist. Those moments happened, and so because they happened, they are still happening in the past. We just can't get there, but they are still happening back then, so they still exist. And good moments in the future that will come, even though they have not yet arrived, they still exist in the future, and so in that way they do exist. And so maybe that's how he sort of deals with the horror of war, is that, hey, bad things happen, but just gotta focus on the good things and try and put everything in perspective. At least that's how I took it. Like I said, it was a pretty crazy book. It had lots to it, but I did enjoy it. I think it was a really good one, especially more than Cat's Cradle. And I think it is because the author's sort of telling a story that he has experienced, but telling it in his own crazy way. So that's Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut.